Hello and welcome back to A Spoonful of History with Mr. Spoonhauer. Today we are going to be talking about Chapter 2, Part 1 of a three-part lecture series, The Foundation of American Colonies, Why People Came Here, as well as the regional differences between New England, Middle, and Southern colonies, as well as the significance of the Great Awakening and paving the way to the American Revolution, both philosophically, socially, and politically. Let's start off with the three main countries that are responsible for colonizing North America. We'll start off with the French. The French, who led by the French explorer Cartier, really began to settle in the Hudson Bay area in Canada, and they spread down through the Great Lakes region, what is now modern-day Ohio, Indiana area, as well as all the way down to New Orleans. Their main reason for coming was to hunt fur, the fur trading and fur trapping, mainly the beaver, which was all the craze because you could basically take the beaver and after preparing it, you could make amazing hats and things like that out of them, and this was all the rage. And the French came here and hunted the beaver almost to an extinction. The next group that came were the Dutch. Now, the Dutch were mainly settled in the middle colonies, Pennsylvania, New York, Delaware, and their main reason for coming here to America was through trading, because you think about it, Holland, the Netherlands, is a very, very small country, and most of it is underwater, under the sea level, I should say, and kept out, and the water is kept out from under sea level because of the windmills and the dams and the dikes and things like that. And because of this, there's not a lot of land, and they have to rely heavily on trading, shipping, and accumulating natural resources from other areas to fuel their economy. And then the last major country that was responsible for colonizing North America would be the English. Originally for gold, Jamestown, the original settlers of Jamestown brought their gold testing kits and wanted to find gold. However, they never did find gold. It was John Smith who finally encouraged them to plant crops into the ground, mainly tobacco, and that was the reason why Jamestown, with the help of Chief Powhatan and his Indian tribe, were able to survive the first winter and create the first permanent colony in North America, which would be Jamestown. Lastly, the Pilgrims, which is probably the most famous of the story, the Puritans, will come to the Massachusetts Bay Colony in New England for religious freedom. We also should acknowledge that another major country that helped colonize North America would be the Spanish, and they mainly came for God and country, meaning that they came to spread religion, the Christian religion, as well as to accumulate more wealth, gold and silver, as well as to prevent the other colonies from acquiring too much land here in North America. So, the first concept that I like to talk about is the importance of the Virginia House of Burgesses. Because Jamestown was successful, and after a few years they realized that they're not going anywhere and that there are more and more people, hundreds of people, that are actually coming to the colony, they realized that they needed to create a representative government. And that's what they did with the Virginia House of Burgesses. Basically, the men of the colony got together in a meeting house there in Jamestown and created this first representative government, which was pretty much modeled after the English Parliament. And this is really important because the House of Burgesses is the first representative government in North America. It's modeled after the English Parliament, but it also acts as a model for our modern Congress and other state congresses along the way. The people who were able to serve in the House of Burgesses were men who owned land. And the reason why land owning was so important is that if you had a stake in the game, meaning if you had something to lose, you would be very conservative in your thoughts as well as in your decisions, because you don't want to lose what you have, as well as those people that own land, have money, obviously have the aptitude necessary to run a large estate. Therefore, they would have the aptitude to be able to run a colony and make decisions for that colony. Like I said before, they were modeled after the English Parliament, and their main job was to make laws for the colony. Now, this is incredibly important because it is the model for representative government in North America, as well as many of our founding fathers like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Patrick Henry, and those all served in the House of Burgesses and were used to this idea of elected representative government. So when England came in and began to dissolve these types of governments, they understood this as being wrong and a violation of their fundamental rights as subjects to the king, and that's why they began to protest. The next important thing that I would like to talk to you guys about, and that was very instrumental in are really fundamental in the American experiment, is the Mayflower Compact. Remember the Mayflower Compact? The Mayflower was the boat that carried the Pilgrims over to America, and the Pilgrims were not the only ones on the Mayflower. The Pilgrims originally wanted to come over on another boat called the Speedwell, but it was taken on water. It was not very seaworthy, so the Pilgrims had to get on the Mayflower with other people who were coming over not for religious freedom but to make money, and their original destination was right here in Virginia. Okay, however, because of a storm, they get blown off course and they wind up landing in modern-day Massachusetts off the coast of Cape Cod. After sailing around for a couple of days, they realize that there's nobody here and that this is a wild, untamed area, and so that they felt there was an opportunity that they could create a new colony, a new community, a shining city upon a hill for the world to see, a Christian community. So before they got off the boat, 44 men put their names to a paper and signed a compact or an agreement to democratically make decisions for the colony. And because of this Mayflower Compact really is the first step to democratic government. And so when you combine the idea of the Mayflower Compact, democracy, with representative government of the House of Burgesses, is what you have today, a representative democracy. And like I said, both of those really act as a model that our founding fathers built upon, plus other Enlightenment ideas from Locke and Rousseau, Montesquieu and Voltaire, that built our Declaration of Independence as well as our Constitution of the United States. The last thing that I want to talk about are really the 13 colonies and how they may be 13 independent colonies in many regards, but they were also united in under the auspices of King George of England. Yet when you look at the 13 colonies, they are very diverse and very different, and they really are united within 3 specific regions or geographic areas. The first one that I want to refer to is New England. New England is basically made up of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, and they predominantly came over, remember, for religious freedom. And because of that, and the Puritans, who they were very big advocates in being rebels, but they were also really into public education and self-subsistence, okay? And they lived on small family farms, and because they lived in an area that was very wild, dark, and cold, and a lot of Native American Indians, they lived within villages with wooden walls around them. And during the day when they went out to work, they oftentimes let their sheep or their cows go out and graze on a town common, and all decisions that needed to be made, they would have town hall meetings at the local church or meeting house, and all decisions would be made by them. And because of this, they have a very unique idea of the role of government in life, that it should be large and very energetic and involved in people's lives. Economically though, because the soil was so rocky and stuff, they were only able to have family farms, meaning they were only able to plant enough crops to feed their family, and this is called subsistence farming. Okay, so they have to make money somehow. So how do they make money? They made money in building ships, they made money in fishing, whaling, trade, and other forms of enterprise with the rest of the world. And because them being Puritans, they heavily believed in the idea of education and literacy and being able to read. So widespread education in public schools are very important in New England, and that is really reason why, if you think about it, so many of the early and most famous universities of the United States, like Harvard, Yale, you have Dartmouth, all of them are really from New England. The second group that I would like to talk about is the Middle Colonies. The Middle Colonies is basically Delaware, New York, Pennsylvania, and they have a diverse economy. They have, because of the people who founded this colony, they were more tolerant, more open to a variety of different ideas and ethnic groups, and had better relationships with Native American Indians. They also had better soil and climate, so they were able to grow a lot more crops. So they were able to grow crops enough to feed themselves, and stuff left over they were able to sell to the rest of the world, and that's called cash crops. But because they were so close to lots of fast-moving rivers and had lots of natural resources like iron and ore, they were also able to engage in industry, factories eventually. And so this is going to create a unique economy that is very different from New England, where New England was primarily shipping, trading, and maritime activity. The Middle Colonies was more factories, industry, and farming. They had a lot of cultural diversity because they believed in people had the right to attain their happiness through their own endeavors. They were open to other religions and faiths and beliefs, as well as different cultures, and that is the reason why many immigrants came to New York early on: the Irish, the Italian, the Polish. And because of this, it built a very important community that were very much against the institution of slavery, as well as very forward thinking. They also were very much into public education. The first public library created by Benjamin Franklin is actually from the Middle Colonies. Now the South makes it made up of Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, and their main form of economy is farming. Okay, and when we say that they're on plantations, only a very small percentage actually lived on plantations. The other portion of the free population within the South would have been indentured servants, as well as tenant farmers and small family farms. Only a very small percentage actually lived on plantations. But what they grew was tobacco, rice, and indigo. And indigo is a flower that, when dried and you grind up and mix with water, is a very valuable blue dye, in which they dyed all sorts of things, including clothes and stuff like that. Because farming is so labor intensive, they will begin to use the model the English brought over to the Caribbean on the sugar plantations, and slavery will come up into North America. Now you have to realize that slavery, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, they all owned slaves, yet they were very much against the institution of slavery and hoped that it would die out, but they understood that it was just part of the economic apparatus of the South, and that it would have to play out over time, but nobody really wanted to address it. And if you were rich and lived on a plantation, if you were to be educated like Thomas Jefferson or James Madison, you were educated by private tutors. The last thing that I want to talk about is the Great Awakening. Now, the Great Awakening started out in England, and the Great Awakening, when it starts out in England, it was because a lot of people in England thought that religion was getting very stale, and people were just kind of going through the motions and getting caught up in daily life. Well, this is brought over by George Whitefield, and colonists really began to feel they weren't less religious, but they were feeling that, you know what, life is just really, really hard. People were going through the motions and just kind of getting away from the real reason to go to church and the real reason why they came over. So ministers like Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield are going to travel throughout the country, and this is incredibly important because they are going to create paths or roads, may not be sometimes physical roads, but spiritual roads that will unite the empire under one common idea, one common language of religion, and eventually of politics and philosophy. And what they did is they taught that all men were equal in the eyes of God. Now, this doesn't seem anything interesting now, but back then that was earth-shattering. That was revolutionary, that we were the same as a king or as a person in authority. But the ministers were saying that we are all equal in the eyes of God, and that we have a profound responsibility that if somebody in authority is abusing that power, that we as children of God need to right that wrong and fix it. And if they don't fix it, then we have the right to get rid of them. And so as this begins to become part of the American psyche, and these Great Awakening preachers begin to spread religion, but they also begin to spread the news and begin to unite the 13 colonies as one group with a common heritage, a common news, and really like a common language. And they really stress education, because you need to be literate to be able to read the Bible. You need to be literate to know your rights, to know the law. And because of this, as you become more literate, become more educated, you become more empowered, and you have the courage to stand up to authority and begin to question authority. And because of the Great Awakening, because of really the ingredients embodied in this is the reason that made our revolution such a miracle in a way, but also so successful, because our revolution wasn't like other revolutions where you take from the rich and you redistribute to the poor and you just create another 1% that abuses the power. But it was more on this idea of God and philosophy and personal freedom and personal rights, where you look at the French Revolution and other revolutions that come after it, many of them fail because they didn't have this same ingredient. That is the end of today's lecture, part 1. Part 2, we will focus on the road to the revolution, the different taxes and usurpations of the British to the American colonists leading up to the Declaration of Independence. And then part 3 will actually talk about the American Revolution and our independence. I thank you for watching. I hope this helps, and I look forward to our next session of A Spoonful of History.